what are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
Hello, welcome to the Bible Nation podcast. I'm Doug Levesque. With me today again is Pastor Jason Georges from Emmanuel Baptist Church in Corunna, Michigan. Pastor Georges, good to have you back. It's been quite a while since we've been back in studio. There's been a lot going on in church life and our lives, but a lot going on in the world. We have a lot to talk about today. How are you doing today?
No, I'm doing great. A little bit of travel.
Yep.
Got out of the country for a little bit, but as we were kind of going through all these things, the world just decided to basically go to hell.
Yeah. I mean, and we were talking about all this,
right?
Because the last episodes that we did, we were talking about the potential peace in Israel with the Saudis and how that had biblical ramifications to it, and how God's in control. He knows what's going on. And then all that's going on in Israel is almost in response to not our podcast,
right.
but is in response to what we said was happening, that there was this unprecedented peace going on that I think Hamas took upon itself to say, we're not going to let that happen.
Right.
And
it was in response to biblical gravity.
Absolutely.
And of course, and that's all we're monitoring.
Yes.
We're just here at the Richter scale of biblical gravity going, it's pinging. Yeah. And that's all that's happening there.
So I decided today as we come back that we'll pick up from that and we'll talk about Hamas, Hezbollah, and particularly the hostages, because that's what's in the news as we're talking today. There is a temporary pause. People like to say ceasefire or truce, but it's not a ceasefire or truce. It really is a temporary pause in order to get some hostages back in exchange for prisoners, which are not political prisoners. They're criminal prisoners. Mostly from the West Bank. They are Palestinians that align with Hamas. And so,
and all of this, just for context, is we haven't had a podcast since the war started.
Right.
This is all in context of the now 6-8 week war that's been happening with Israel and Hamas murdering hundreds of Israeli citizens, and now Israel invading or destroying Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
So most of what you'd see on network television is minuscule. You're not getting the whole story.
Right.
And usually leftist media is giving you kind of a tainted view of what's going on. And sometimes the vocabulary is going back and forth, so you really don't know how to define the vocabulary. And so from one minute to the next, your kind of emotions are going up and down, and then you see rioters in the streets and you know that sort of thing. And then most of what you're seeing on the internet like this is from people getting information and either just regurgitating it or saying, hey, wait a minute, let's really look at what's going on. And I think that's what we're doing today with the lens of Scripture on in regards to Hamas and Hezbollah.
Well, and what the word that you said there that's very pertinent is emotions, because the media is not dealing in truths, facts, or even equities.
Right.
They're dealing strictly in emotions.
Right.
And so the images, the stories that are being highlighted, the same images repeated over and over again, highlighting different stories, the same crying baby, the same blown up corner of a hospital, whatever it is all designed to provoke a planned response.
And again, that's why I said it's not really a truce. It's not really a ceasefire. So I'm trying to define the terms. It's really more of a pause to exchange what are true hostages, and I want to talk about hostage taking with political prisoners. It's not a hostage exchange sort of thing. It's not even really a prisoner exchange, because it's one thing on one side and one thing on another. And if anybody's kind of taking it in the shorts, it's Israel.
Right.
They were winning, and so putting the pressure on is what caused Hamas to say, okay, whoa, we're about to be taken over. Let's offer some of these hostages, which is why they took them in the first place.
Right.
And so Israel had to say, do we stop the pressure? And that's why from the beginning they've said, this isn't over. We're coming back. We're just doing this for prisoners. And they've been very clear about that, even though all the talk gets muddled between nations. And, some of the European nations have come out and said, we want this truce to continue, or this ceasefire needs to continue. Today, the latest news was that Iran and Hezbollah are coming out and saying, well, we'll be peaceful on the border if the truce continues. Well, that wasn't part of the original deal at all.
Right.
And yet all of a sudden it becomes part of the narrative, and people might begin to think that that's, that Israel's being unreasonable or whatever. But from the beginning, they have been clear with their vocabulary. From day one, they came out and said, this is war. And so their immediate retaliation with planes was after a declaration of war. And then from then, they've been consistent with now they have their internal battles going on for sure, but they are, I would say, 90 to 95% united in this war.
And let us be clear, because we haven't had a chance to say the definitive statement.
Right.
Israel has the right to defend itself.
Yes.
Because Israel is a sovereign nation.
Yes.
That was attacked.
Yes.
And its citizens were murdered. And the response for that is not necessarily a 1-for-1, because when you invade a sovereign nation, when you murder innocents,
right.
And then the military response, it's not the military responds until the death tolls are the same.
Right.
The military responds until its nation that it's defending is protected.
When Germany invaded Poland
Right.
in World War II, September 1939, the Brits had an agreement that they would declare war, and they did. Before they ever had sent troops, they declared war and then started gearing up for that. Well, then the Germans almost immediately began bombing civilians, right? And this was almost unheard of, that it wasn't a battle between armies. It was, we're bombing London. And some 25,000 people died in the London bombings. I mean, they evacuated children to the countryside. People moved out of the city. They had all kinds of responses to that. Well, then the British responded by bombing multiple German cities through the course of the war. And people think really the death toll went into the hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 million people. The same with Japan. Japan attacked us. We declared war. Through the course of that, they tried to bomb some things on the West Coast. They sent incendiary bombs, et cetera, et cetera. And then we ended up not just nuking them, but just firebombing them. We killed more people with firebombing in Tokyo than we did with nuclear bombs. I mean, we were killing 100,000 plus a day just with firebombing alone. And so the idea that people are outraged now that so-called 15,000 civilians, 60% women and children. Well, that's all Hamas statistics,
Right.
Right. That the news is reporting, undiscriminatory and hardly responding to that. It's probably half of that. Much of that is probably terrorists, and some of it is disappointingly so-called innocents. And but I mean that's war.
But that's what I was going to say. It's in line with all the other metrics of any other war in the 20th century that we said was just.
It doesn't make it good. It doesn't, and
we don't glory in it.
And we don't. And we talk about just war theory. It doesn't make it good. Doesn't make it just, but it makes it war.
Right.
And we tried to make rules of warfare, and I think Israel is trying to do that, whereas Hamas has no impetus to do that and is not being held responsible. They just kind of play the whole woke mentality of throwing guilt upon Europeans and Americans and trying to play that. That's kind of pretty much what they've got.
Which this is such a secondary or another podcast.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. You can tell, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
And how you have supposed contradictory worldviews actually aligning themselves.
Right.
Because it's never about the individual ideology. It's always about coming against God and the Bible.
Right.
That is the ideology of the world. So you have Hamas, which are Muslims, radical Muslims, right?
Yep.
And who have no consideration for a homosexual, no consideration for women,
blacks,
and then you have the supposed progressives of this country up in arms and defending Hamas, who by their very existence is the complete opposite of what they say they would stand up for.
Yeah, it's insanity, isn't it? It really is just absolutely crazy. Well, when Israel became a nation in 1948, the UN had made the partition. And Britain basically had ruled the whole area, right? And so they decided with the UN that there would be a two-state solution. That was the initial thing. There would be two contiguous states, even though the map was just insane. Like whoever drew that map was just crazy. And they were trying to accommodate everybody, and they basically accommodated nobody. And Britain really, I think, is to blame because they promised the Arab Palestinians a state, or so the Arab Palestinians say, and they promised the Jews a state. And there were conflicts within the Jews, and there were conflicts within the Arabs. And I think probably the British understood this and probably fomented that as well so that they could rule. And then they all of a sudden want to back out and give it to the UN, and their mandate is over. And so they kind of left it a mess, and it was probably going to be a mess, what you talk about the biblical gravity of the situation. So then as soon as that takes place, well, all the Arab nations around attack. Now, I don't know if they took a vote amongst the Palestinian Arabs that lived in the area, because all of a sudden the Palestinian Arabs, they're a war that they can't win. They're fleeing the country. They're going to Jordan and Egypt and everywhere else. And over the 3 or 4 wars, all the way up through the 70s and then even the 80s, they keep losing ground through warfare. Israel's being attacked. They're fighting back. They're gaining ground, spoils of war. People have left. They leave their lands. The lands are kind of like at a forfeiture at a bank. They get sold or whatever. And so they want a right of return. Israel's not going to give a right of return. They've offered it several times, but it's never, happened. And so now there's very little, green on the map that would be considered Arab-Palestinian land.
Right.
It's not contiguous. And so the idea of a two-state solution really has had 70-plus years
Right.
of consternation and offers and everything else. It's not happened, and it's not. And really, the Saudis, when they were offering this peace deal, were offering that. They were saying we need a two-state solution. This needs to be solved. And of course, then this happens. And so it's farther away. It's not closer. It's farther away, because who's going to rule what places? Because the West Bank is ruled by Fatah, the old PLO, and they've declared that they would be peaceful and political, even though they're not. But 2/3 of the West Bank vote for Hamas.
Right.
And so the Fatah is holding on through corruption, through mock elections. And of course, in the Gaza, it's 80% that have voted for Hamas. So ain't nobody innocent in all this. And of course, Hamas's charter is cut and dry. It's clear. It's 100%. We want to remove Israel from the map and make it our map. There's no diplomacy or two-state solution in their verbiage, even though everybody else around talks that way. And the reason they do is because Egypt doesn't want to deal with them. Egypt doesn't want it. Jordan doesn't want to do them. They already have Palestinian refugee camps where the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas types are taken over, where they have foreign influence in their own land and they can't handle it.
The Arab world is brothers that can't stand each other.
Oh, it's pure hypocrisy.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some of them have money and some of them don't.
Right.
And,
Yeah, they just can't. And of course, there's a whole sociological, anthropological, reasons for that.
Absolutely.
Everything from polygamy and all the different things.
Yeah.
There's a reason why they don't like each other.
Yeah. I
They
mean,
can't
and
get along.
again, that goes back to the Bible.
Right.
There was Abraham's and Sarah's impatience,
Right.
and then there was Ishmael, and there was Ishmael's descendants. Genesis 9, he shall be a wild man, and every man shall be against him, and he shall be against every man. I mean, that's being played out today to some respect, even each other.
It's like the Bible knows.
And then Abraham marries Keturah, who
Yep.
supposedly was a handmaid of Sarah, whatever, and has an additional 7 kids. So who's the inheritor of Abraham?
Right.
The Abraham Accords. I mean, that's what they're talking about. We're all sons of Abraham. We're all cousins, right?
we're all
So let's
cousins.
just get along. But who gets the blessings and cursings of Abraham, right?
Right.
Who gets that? And so, it's amazing that we're 3,500 years. I mean, we're more than that. We're 4,000 years
Right.
removed. We really are. We're 4,000 years removed. And this is the central issue leading the news papers, leading the news accounts. And we're talking about it today
Right.
because we're a Bible nation, and the Bible, it talks about this
But
stuff.
the Bible was just written by some ignorant shepherds on the backside of the desert who knew nothing about anything.
Right, exactly, right.
And yet it's ruling the affairs of the world.
It's right, that's right. Well, let's talk about really Hamas.
Yeah,
We'll talk about Hamas and then Hezbollah. And the Department of National Intelligence says that Hamas is an acronym for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyah, which means Islamic Resistance Movement. It's the largest, most capable militant group in the Palestinian territories, and one of the territories' 2 major political parties emerged in 1987 from the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, so that's where the Muslim Brotherhood has come from, and it is the de facto governing body in the Gaza Strip since 2007. However, it is, it has 2/3 of support in the West Bank as well, so it's potent in the West Bank as well. There are huge Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, and there is great in Egypt as well, and they have regional capitals, they call them, in Doha, Qatar, and Cairo, Egypt. There's between 20 and 25,000 ruling members. So that's not the military. That's just people that are part of the party. So think of a Nazi party,
Right.
right? A minority that's ruling a majority and somehow is manipulating the military control of what's going on, and they all want to get rid of the Jews. The United States State Department designated Hamas as a foreign terrorist organization in October of 1997, but just recently, when Biden became president, he took them off the list. So now they're talking about putting them back on the list. But why would he do that?
Right.
Why would he do that when they're really, very clear in that? So the Department of National Intelligence still has them listed as a terrorist agent organization, even though the Biden administration supposedly took them off that list. And yet that's still on a government agency website. The Council on Foreign Relations is obviously not a government organization. It's a private organization, but many influential people, mostly from the United States and Great Britain, are part of the CFR, and basically a lot of them are our government persons. Or, it's a huge think tank. And so they say, what is Hamas? And in summary, a spin-off of the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. So again, we got two really respectable things saying they're part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? They're a terrorist organization because of suicide bombings and rocket attacks. And then basically they update it and say they have the deadliest attack in Israeli history from what they've done there. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood took over ruling after Mubarak died in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood won the election. All right, that was during the Bush administration. And we were saying, oh, it's the Arab Spring. They had free elections for the first time. Well, what did the people elect? They elected the Muslim Brotherhood. And al-Sisi, who is now the president of Egypt, he actually was a military commander that basically successfully cast a coup and pushed out the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, so that's really what happened there. At the same time, Erdogan, who's the president up in Turkey, he was the mayor of Istanbul, Constantinople, but he was a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. And so these are the actors that you've got there supporting this mentality, even though some are Sunni and some are Shia. But both of the stated goals were to remove Israel, to go back pre-1948, not just 1967 supposed lines. So this is wishful thinking. This is wanting to go back in time. This would be like someone in the United States saying, we want to go back to happy days, 1950s with the jukebox and Fonzie, hey, and then basically trying to politically and militarily, even through terrorism, whatever, bring it about.
Or England saying we want to go pre-1776.
Right.
Like America does not exist.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a pipe dream, but again, it's entailed culturally in the Islamic mindset against the Jew as well. Now, ABC News is so liberal, and yet they have the best timeline of the battle going on their website, Israel-Hamas War, timeline and key developments. And so they really say that 1,200 people have been killed in Israel, along with 6,900 others injured on that day, October 7th. And 383 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers have been killed since October 7th, including 68 since the ground campaign began. So I think today, as of today, there's 69 Israeli soldiers have been killed since the shooting war started. But on that day, there was an additional, basically 320 some soldiers were killed. So there were soldiers fighting that day, on the border lines and in the cities.
Quick response.
Yes, and there were some, I think, 50 or 60 policemen that got killed as well.
Which is amazing and a testament to Israel's war-making ability, because this is an easy war. This is urban warfare. Yeah. And that they're able to do so with such high ability to preserve their own soldiers.
Yeah, and the fact that 320 guys plus 60 cops, so you had less than 400 people.
Right.
But they fought off, they say 2,500. Yep. Who knows if that's just Israel. But they say they fought off 2,500 guys. And basically they were able to sustain a battle for about 2 days. October 7th, October 8th, and then maybe into October 9th was it before they all kind of retreated out. But Israel said, we were so weak at that time. If they would have pushed a couple more miles in, they could have taken really vital bases, communication bases, armor bases, air bases. They could have destroyed airplanes because they didn't have, because it was a Sabbath, it was the end of a holiday, et cetera, et cetera.
No, it was a Pearl Harbor.
It was absolutely.
Their pants were down.
So basically, the day of October 7th, Hamas comes out and says, we're responsible. Netanyahu comes out and says, I've sent jets, we're at war. Right? So that happens immediately. And then by October 8th, fighting was ongoing. They sent special forces to 6 different places, had to take over some, and of course, at this point, they don't even know how many are dead, how many were slaughtered. And of course, then the slaughter was a lot of civilians. I mean, 1,000 civilians that were at this so-called concert. Young people.
For peace.
For peace, yeah. Women, children, old folks, and then a couple hundred hostages taken. That included babies whose parents were killed and slaughtered. And, talk about innocence or whatever. It just, and then babies were killed. Kind of smacks to me of Herod killing the innocents or Pharaoh killing the innocents. It's of a biblical proportion, and so it's absolutely horrid. And the next day, Biden came out and said, we're supporting Israel. This is horrific. And who's the Secretary of State? Blinken, came out and said, everyone should be sickened by this.
Right.
And of course, they got to see, the video of what exactly happened. And I don't know that we need to rehash everything that happened, but it included rape, beheading, burning alive, torture, persecution.
It was the full display of raw Islamic society for the
Yes.
world to see. In other words, that is Islam.
Yes.
And so I always disagree when, this is not Islam. No. That's Islam at its root.
Yes.
When it goes all the way through,
Yes.
that's what it is.
They might have art. Islam might have art, culture, architecture, mathematics, some beauty in music, and maybe even, military might or strategy or all these different kinds of things that you could say are high things. But it also has some of the very lowest things. Not that Christian crusaders didn't do wrong, sort of thing. But we've moved on. We're not Christian crusading anymore and killing Jews and everybody that's not our color. But they still seem to want to go back to 700-800 AD and have that sort of world, which would be a man's world, wouldn't be a woman's world, wouldn't be a black man's world, wouldn't be a LGBTQ world.
Or a democratic world.
Wouldn't be a democratic world by any means.
I mean, really, the smartest way for Hamas to overtake Israel is to participate in the democracy that Israel provides. And they would in a generation, because that's how we are.
Yeah.
That's what we've done in America.
Yeah.
I mean, America is the blueprint on how to take over a nation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and if they would just participate. So that's Hamas that's down in Gaza and in the West Bank. And but then up north, immediately, day of the battle, within the first 24 hours, Hezbollah up in Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah is not synonymous with Lebanon. Hezbollah is a third, we'll say, of the population. They're Shiites amongst Sunnis and Christians and whatever, but they're primarily in southern Beirut, northern Lebanon, and southern Lebanon. And there are UN observant bases down there. I think right now there's Irish troops in those. But I mean, you haven't heard anything about that because they're not even a tripwire. They're not saying anything to anybody about anything. But neither is the UN, really, right? So the UN is kind of worthless when it comes to UN peacekeeping, right? It's not doing it. And so they're, it's not, I wouldn't call it so much a hot war compared to what's going on in Gaza. But I mean, we're talking hundreds and even thousands of bombs have gone over both ways, and scores of people are dead,
Right.
On either side. So Hezbollah is a similar type of organization. It's a political party and militant group that first emerged during Lebanon's civil war as a militia after the Israel invasion of that country in 1982. And since that time has been one of the foremost political forces. This is from Encyclopedia Britannica, which is not which is not necessarily a conservative thing. So it separates it and says it is clearly a Sunni operation, which is Iran, right? So Mecca is, the Sunni Rome, if you will, but Qom, Qom in Iran, is the Shiite Rome, and so there's different sects of Islam, and the Shiites then are just connected with, even though Iran is Persian, and the Lebanese down there would be more kind of blended in with Arabs, with Arabs. And
Don't you think Lebanon has a little bit different, has an identity that's rooted a little bit different in their geographical location?
Well, they call themselves Canaanites.
Yeah.
I've been there, and they say, well, we're the original Canaanites. So they want to say that, they preceded the Persian Empire or the Persian glory or something like that. But yet they speak Arabic. They have Arabic style culture. They have Islamic Sharia law, that overtakes them. The Palestinians are really just Arabs. They're more Jordanians, right? Yeah. Now, Egyptians would say we're Egyptians, and Turks would say they're Turks, and Iranians would say we're Persians, we're Iranian. But everyone else really is Arab.
Most of the mainline Arab things that we taste and experience here in America are Lebanese.
Right.
It's like if you go to a Mediterranean restaurant, it's a Lebanese restaurant.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like we go to Chinese food, but like our version of Americanized Chinese food is from a certain part of China. It's not representative of all that. And so
when Britain had the British mandate over, Israel, Palestine, the French had the French mandate over Lebanon. And so Beirut was called the Paris of the East, and it was sophisticated.
And it has some of its finer things.
Yeah, and so their food, their culture, their music, and they were very Western, and they had a lot of Christianity, there as well. They still do.
That's what I'm saying is there's a little bit of a Lebanese identity that's built to the land in that region more than just simply Palestinian, that is Islamic, that is.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I've been there. I was there after the Civil War, and, it was all shot up, things, but they had all kinds of green lines. The lines are literally painted green lines on the roads. That's why they call them. And so this area was Christian. This area was Sunni. This area was under Beirut, Lebanese government control. This area was under Syrian control. I mean, the Syrians controlled so much of the area. And then the Wild West was the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah was at. And so I circulated amongst them. I found them to be not so much Islamists as much as they were political monsters.
Yeah.
And so they talked about religion, and they were open to talk about religion and stuff, but they much more wanted to talk about America and Israel, even though they don't say the word Israel when I was in their midst. So I didn't find them cowboys, or I found them somewhat sophisticated and kind and hospitable and stuff like that. But I mean, I wasn't allowed to say Israel.
Right.
I wasn't allowed to preach. I was allowed to answer questions about Jesus. What I mean? So they're not afraid of that. Of course, Islam respects Isa, and to some extent. But but Hezbollah is now threatening. So you've got Hezbollah on the north, which are Shiite, Hamas on the south, which are Sunni, and then you've got the West Bank, which is kind of mixed. But Turkey and Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt all support Hamas. So they've got all kinds of outside support, and that's where all that ringing is coming from. The International Criminal Court, and I do not like the International Criminal Court. Okay, I'm not for it. But the International Criminal Court has a document you can get online called the Element of Crimes, and of course it's international crimes, and it's not talking about drug running. It's talking about in times of war, and Article 6 is about genocide, and then Article 7 is crimes against humanity, and then Article 8 is war crimes. Every single one of those have hostage taking. Every single one of those have. In other words, you can take over a city, and by virtue of taking over the city, you have all these people. But that doesn't mean they're taken hostage. You now have to make sure they're safe, have medicine, water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you take someone from their home, from their family, and you take them and you hold them hostage, particularly to cover you, that is a war crime. That is genocide. That is against the International Criminal Code.
These hostages are not Israeli hostages are not prisoners of war. These were not combatants on a battlefield that dropped their guns and surrendered and waved the white flag.
Not even the soldiers.
No,
because they weren't in a state of war. They had a previous truce and ceasefire.
Right.
They were under truce and ceasefire, and so to not declare war, to just attack, is still against the International Criminal Code. Now, what is the International Criminal Code? I mean, is it even moral? Is it even right?
Well, and our objection to it is because we don't want anything that has sovereignty over our nation.
Right.
So we don't want to put America subservient to an authority that is outside of our own democratic or Republican democratic process.
The last place I wanted to go was just about hostage taking. And I found this paper by Jason Paul Wickman. It was one of those thesis papers you find online. And it's from Liverpool University in England. And his paper is called The Enslavement of War Captives by the Romans to 146 BC. And it's really interesting because he talks about how in antiquity, you took the war captives to utilize as slaves to work in your fields while the men went to war. And so, in a way, it was protection. And then they used them as protection. So you got to go back to pre-Christ to look at where this was last done on an okay scale where everybody participated in hostage taking.
Right.
And it wasn't a war crime, it was just how it was. If you got overtaken, whether you were at war or not, and you were a slave, and you got put in the fields, or you were some sort of protection against the army, or you were traded and sold, for the strength of your family, the captors' families or whatever, which is what's going on today in Hamas.
Commodities.
I mean, it's barbaric. It's
Yes.
pre-Christ. And so Christianity has set the captives free.
Yes.
And here we come down to our final thoughts.
Yeah.
That a Bible nation has changed society, even changed what war is, how we define it, what the rules are, how we practice it, how we prosecute after the war is over. And so the reason I say Hamas and Hezbollah is because they take hostages. They take them for bargaining. They take them for protection. They take them as blockades, as human shields or whatever. And this was the intention to begin with. And today we're seeing, a forced peace or pause, but that's only come about because Israel hit so hard. I really truly believe that. And so this morning there were, shots fired, smoke in the air over Gaza. In other words, while they said they would extend it for 2 more days and try to get another 20 hostages, somebody doesn't want that to happen within. It's probably not Israel. It's probably some other Islamic Jihad group or whatever that's like, no, we want this to end. And so as of today, it sounds to me like it's probably done, in that process. But this is barbaric. Hamas should be held to account on this. Israel doesn't have a choice but to say, we are going to smash you until we get our hostages back and this is done. We're not going to negotiate with terrorists, and we're not going to negotiate, especially a 2-state solution, with someone that we can't get along with. And so the only reason why Fatah is in power is because it's not affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and because they've said we're not going to do this by violence. Now, they could be disingenuous in it, but they're the ones that Israel's propping up because they're like, yeah, we want it to be at peace. And so people need to realize that this is not just Israel committing genocide, right? The Barbary pirates were dealt with by not giving ransom, but Biden just gave billions of dollars to Iran for prisoners. So we've gone all the way back, pre-Jefferson, pre-America. And so, we've gone full circle because once America got in power, we said, we're not playing European games. We're not giving ransom. We're not having terrorists. We're going to create the Marines and we're going to send them in and to the shores of Tripoli.
Because you can't profit from this behavior.
You can't profit from this behavior. And since then, we've always said, we don't deal with terrorists. We don't give ransoms. We don't do this. Supposedly, yeah. At least that's been, the face of what we do. And this is what the Marines are for. We're going to kick in the door and take names. So civil society has rejected this ancient practice because Christianity has erased it. But Islam has embraced it and is still using it today. And so, we don't want to put down all Islamic, Muslim, Arabic peoples in the world by any stretch. But we're just saying, hey, accept Christ, you'll have a better society.
Right.
Live under the auspices of Christianity, and it won't be perfect because men aren't perfect, but we won't have this form of, ante-Nicene butchery and barbary. You'll get a day in court. You'll get some sort of protection in the law because right now there's nobody anywhere there that has that.
Yeah, and I think, to the listener, as you're listening and this is being debated in the market of ideas, Hamas and Hezbollah do not represent an idea that is equal to the ideals that we are defending.
There's no moral equivalence.
Right. They're not equal partners. They're not. This is not a debate between two equally weighted sides. 50% here, 50% here. And now we got to work our difference out in the middle. They are two different ends.
And the people in America and in the West that are somehow defending and finding solidarity with Hamas and all this stuff against Israel, there's not only not moral equivalency, there's no moral equity. There's no moral understanding amongst these kinds of people as well. And so we ought to consider that what they do in the streets, burning things and undermining elections and things like this, is terrorist behavior. I mean, we ought to reject it as well, as much as we can through the law. But, I don't like the fact that Trump today is saying we need to be able to utilize the U.S. military within the borders of the United States. We've never done that.
Never.
And this is why, Trump's responses are popular with some people, but that's not what Christianity has brought about in America either.
And they're unhinged to anything other than his own self-interest.
Absolutely. And so just the swinging of the pendulum will take it the other way. And so we have to keep Christ in the conversation. We have to keep, what is our republic? It was created by this Christian form and ideal. Benjamin Franklin said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. But everybody has said this form can only be had by a moral people who understand it and govern themselves. Psalm 53, verse 6, "Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion. When God bringeth back the captivity of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad." We're seeing just a foretaste of that play out today, where they're rejoicing over getting a baby or a daughter or a grandmother, back. But that is a picture of what Christ does in every human heart in setting the captive free, and what he'll do when he comes again, especially in Israel. So the bells are ringing, the trumpets are warming up. We are so very close. So Pastor Jay, I'm going to give you, the final thing. Talk to your fellow pastors, talk to fellow Christians on how they can pray and what they should be thinking.
Well, no, I was just thinking, you shared that gospel thought there, but Israel, the nation of Israel, is a nation of promise, but embedded in those promises has always been the return from captivity. And so in this micro sense of these individual captors, but they are part of a nation that God has promised to use captivity for their chastisement, for their correction, but to always return them from captivity.
That's potent.
And so, I mean, we're seeing that played even in right before our eyes again.
So even God's working with Israel now again.
And so that's a perspective. And of course, that same truth, that's the same God, is the God that you can have in your own heart through a personal relationship with Christ, who does set the captives free. I think to pastors, and the closing thought is, you do not get caught up in the Fox News media sentimentality of having an improper perspective of not the humanity, not for the humanitarian crisis, because it is, and our hearts ought to be broken, but don't let that mask the ideological differences of what is taking place, and these things are not equal.
Yeah, correct. Thank you so very much, Pastor. It's good to have you today on the Bible Nation podcast. You can check us out at BibleNation.org. Respond to us. We'd love to hear from you. We've got a lot of wonderful resources there for you. Might be good Christmas gifts for you as well. And stay tuned. Remember, the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works.